All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. As you know, I am Mayor Brandon Scott of Baltimore City. I'd like to welcome you to the city of Baltimore this morning, and thank you for being here today to discuss the state's Consolidated Transportation Program. Secretary Wiedefeld, we appreciate your leadership at MDOT and your continued partnership with the city of Baltimore. We are really especially thankful for your quick response and collaboration around the Key Bridge collapse and your commitment to ensuring that we build the bridge back better and stronger than ever. As you know, from being there, you and I being there literally from minute one together, it's a tragedy like something that we've never seen. But I want to, again, thank you for your leadership from minute one up into and through this day. The collapse of the bridge demonstrated for the world what we already knew. Our state and our city are stronger when we work together. We show the world, as you know, what true collaboration looks like between federal, state, county, and city governments. And for that, I want to thank you, Mr. Secretary, and of course, our fabulous governor for his leadership. But today is about this year's CTP, which for us in Baltimore City falls short of what we hope to see. It's no secret that in Baltimore City, more than 24,000 workers commute into downtown from other parts of the city. Nearly 30% of households in our city don't have access to a car, 30%. And unfortunately, for a city with high levels of reliance on transit, we all know that our options are limited. Our residents often experience transit delays, and our system is in need of significant maintenance and repair. For many Baltimoreans, like it was for me growing up in Park Heights, transit isn't an option, it's a necessity for life. In Baltimore, which is unique, as you know, amongst jurisdictions across the state when it comes to transportation needs and funding, these issues compound on each other. And in the wake of the Key Bridge collapse, as you know, we are seeing increased traffic on local roads all over the city, but local roads in particular like Eastern Avenue, Frankfurt Avenue, and Pennington Avenue, which are all in need of significant work, and increased traffic on the Hanover Street Bridge, which we all know is well past its useful life cycle and need of being replaced. During the General Assembly session last year, and I'll take a minute to say good morning to all my elected colleagues, Councilman Cohen, my Councilman Dorsey, myself, you, and the MTA administrator should have carpooled today. That's what we should have done. That's what we've done. You just had to do a daycare stop on the way. Council Vice President Middleton, Delegate Idelson, Delegate Ruff, Delegate Rosenberg, and Madam Chair, how are you? Congratulations. Congratulations to Delegate Wells, our new delegation chair. But during the General Assembly session last year, we advocated against the proposed cut to the city's highway user revenue allocation for fiscal 25. And while we appreciate that HUR is not being reduced in this draft CTP, the fact remains that more than a decade-long cut resulted in the city losing over $900 million in transportation revenue. And that $900 million loss meant roads went without significant resurfacing. Many sidewalks that needed repairs did not get them in a timely manner. The loss in transportation revenue deepened our ADA challenges, and our residents are still feeling the impact of those cuts as they walk, bike, and drive throughout Baltimore today. It's an unfortunate reality that throughout our city's history, the state often looks to Baltimore and yes to transportation for cuts in tough budget times. We said it last year during the HER debate, and unfortunately, we have to say it again this year. We should not be balancing the budget on the backs of Baltimoreans who rely on transit. It's inequitable, it's unsustainable, but most importantly, it's not reflective of who we are as a state. In Maryland, we fight for the most vulnerable among us, like the grandparents, students, and families in Sandtown, Winchester, that rely on MTA bus service to get to work and to school. We show up for individuals with disabilities that need access to ADA-compliant sidewalks and ramps. We don't balance the budget on vulnerable communities that need that transit to survive. The Maryland that I know and love invests equitably and provides access to opportunity for vulnerable communities through investments like the Red Line, which the Moore-Miller administration rightly revived and is dead set on seeing happen. This governor has demonstrated what it means when he says that this is Baltimore's time by investing in our state's largest city through smart transit policy. But with WMATA seeing an increase in capital funding while MDOT MTA sees a decrease, it's hard not to see that legacy still lingering in how budget decisions are being made. Even with the increased revenue forecasted with the revised HUR formula, Baltimore City requires a significant injection of additional revenue to jumpstart critical regional infrastructure projects. The city's priorities are very clear. They've been the same for a long time now, and I know many in leadership across the state share these priorities. We need transportation infrastructure that will improve quality of life for our residents, create opportunity, and bolster the economic engine of Maryland. We want to set ourselves up for success on the Red Line project, which cuts to the state of good repair, and rail project funding changes might endanger. We want to see through projects that we already have underway, like Drew Park Lake Drive, the Hanover Street Bridge, investment in infrastructure surrounding the Port of Baltimore, Vision Zero efforts, and making our city more ADA compliant as we continue to be embroiled in ongoing litigation on that front. We appreciate the state's partnership in many of these endeavors, and I want to extend specific thanks for partnership with MTA on our most recent grant application for West Baltimore United. But the cuts in this year's CTP make it harder and harder for us to address our needs when it comes to transportation in Baltimore, and it seriously jeopardizes our ability to achieve the aspirational projects that our residents so desperately need. You hear more specifics from City DOT experts and many elected leaders from across Baltimore, so I'll end with this. I know that you, Mr. Secretary, your team, our governor, and the entire administration are making tough calls in a tough budgetary moment. Here at the city, we know all about making those tough calls in those tough moments. Few understand the difficulty of those types of decisions better than I do as an executive. And that's why I'm committed to working with you, Mr. Secretary, and your entire team to ensure that we build a path forward that doesn't further jeopardize our already strained transit system. Baltimoreans of all stripes, from every neighborhood, but particularly those most in need, are counting on you, and as a matter of fact, they're counting on us to make the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, everyone. I am Corinne Johnson, Director for the Baltimore City Department of Transportation. And first and foremost, I want to thank Mayor Scott, of course, for being here and leading us in this meeting today, as well as Secretary Wiedefeld and his entire team, as well as our slew of local elected officials, both the local and state levels, who are here taking time out of their busy schedules to have this important conversation today. I also greatly appreciate the quick response by MDOT and its modal administrations surrounding the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. We look forward to ongoing efforts to rebuild the bridge and collaboration regarding restoration efforts to city infrastructure impacted by the additional traffic. I want to reiterate Mayor Scott's point that Baltimore is unique. We are at a critical point in our renaissance, one that not only impacts the city of Baltimore, but as the economic engine of Maryland. It means that where we choose to invest is a reflection of our values as Marylanders. We in the city are prioritizing projects like West Baltimore United that reconnect communities, address critical infrastructure, and increase safety and accessibility for all roadway users. But reductions to transit infrastructure projects and multimodal transportation programs could imperil the continued economic growth of the city and region, which directly hampers Maryland's growth and success. Baltimore City relies in large part on MTA's transit services, and I have to echo Mayor Scott's remark that it is concerning that the requirements of the law are not being met for MTA while the law is being exceeded with overfunding for WMATA. The proposed deferrals will lead to increased maintenance, malfunctions, unplanned system shutdowns due to safety concerns, and transportation disruptions to commuters, students, and visitors to this city. The Moore-Miller administration has pledged to refocus on Baltimore after years of disinvestment. However, residents and investors everywhere see these cuts as an indicator of Baltimore being unable to reach its full potential, and unreliable transit impacts employment, school performance, and overall quality of life. We cannot fall short of serving our primary customers. And who are they? They are our students. They are parents and workers who depend on transit for their livelihoods and to get home to their families. But with unreliable transportation, they may face job security concerns. Our residents are watching. These Marylanders notice when Baltimore is passed up for improvements year after year, as they have to walk farther and wait longer to get where they need to go. These cuts will perpetuate a feeling of disillusionment, dissatisfaction, disenfranchisement among Baltimoreans who rely on these core services for their livelihoods. In addition to deferred zero-emission bus program-related projects, light rail system rehabilitation, and the Howard Street Rail Replacement Project, our core services aspects like working elevators and escalators, the lack of which has an impact on our senior population, as well as those persons with disabilities. And as director of the Baltimore City Department of Transportation, it is imperative that I advocate for our most vulnerable riders, imploring MDOT to deliver safe and accessible multimodal transportation options for every roadway and rail user. This means funding MTA State of Good Repair to the level prescribed in the 2022 Capital Needs Inventory. Additionally, this builds the foundation for securing federal support for large modernization projects like the Red Line construction needs. Funding transit provides the public with a greater return on investment and leads to opportunities like transit-oriented development, which creates revenue for the city and state, and housing, employment, and business opportunities in communities. Providing a reliable and well-maintained transit system in Baltimore means delivering opportunities for the economic vitality of Baltimore City and Maryland, while enhancing the quality of life for Baltimoreans by connecting them to life's opportunities. My team and I greatly appreciate the partnership we've developed with MDOT, particularly MTA and Administrator Arnold. This is reflected in our co-application for the latest West Baltimore United grant application, which is mutually beneficial, meeting the goals of both agencies. I know that the development of a major capital budget is challenging, but I also know from past experience that we, all the included stakeholders here today, can tackle this challenge together to ensure that the basic needs of these citizens are met. And so I thank you for taking time to join us today for this important discussion of Baltimore's trajectory and the opportunities and consequences of the draft Consolidated Transportation Program.
Thank you, Madam Director. I erred a little bit. I didn't see a bunch of our other electeds on this side, so I'm going to go down the list here. We also been joined by City Councilman Antonio Glover, Delegate Robin Lewis, my delegate Stephanie Smith, my other delegate Kaylin Young, Councilwoman Odette Ramos, Delegate Liz Embry, Councilman Mark Conway, and Delegate Regina Boyce. Now I have everybody. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mayor. Hello again, everyone. Paul Wiedefeld, Secretary of Transportation. Thank you for inviting us to provide an overview of the draft 6-year Consolidated Transportation Program, more commonly known as the CTP, which covers fiscal years 25 through 30. I will keep my opening comments brief, focusing on an update on the department's finances, since it drives the investment levels for projects and services in Baltimore City and throughout the state. I will then turn the briefing over to representatives from the various modes to discuss in more detail projects and services specific to Baltimore City. And of course, at the end of the presentation, we're available to answer questions that you may have. Before I go further, though, I did want to take a moment to briefly discuss the Francis Scott Key Bridge. The collapse of the iconic bridge and the loss of 6 workers continues to have a tremendous impact on communities, commuters, and businesses. Mayor, I wanted to thank you, obviously, for the partnership that we had, literally, as you said, since minute one. I particularly want to recognize the Baltimore City Fire Department. As we've discussed before, I'm the son of a Baltimore City firefighter and a brother, Baltimore City firefighter, Truck 16 and Engine 21. So I'm very... just to see the performance of those professionals, in the heat of the moment was fantastic. So I just want to thank you and your leadership there. The department has taken a holistic approach to mitigating congestion on the transportation system by promoting alternative options and resources. The Commuter Choice Maryland program is working with businesses and commuters to promote options like transit, carpooling, teleworking, or flexible work schedules. MDOT will continue to work closely with you and your team to mitigate any traffic issues that impact neighborhoods and local roads. The Maryland MDTA, the Transportation Authority, is on a fast track to rebuild the bridge over the next 4 years, as we've committed to. In August, the MDTA board approved a contract for Progressive Design Builder. Just to be clear, the MDTA is funded through toll revenues it collects and is separate from the state's transportation fund, which I'll be speaking to today. We're continuing to work with Maryland's federal delegation on a bipartisan legislation to get 100% emergency relief funding from the federal government to rebuild the Key Bridge. The timing and amount of that funding is still uncertain. Regardless, the state will pursue the Dolly and its owners for all the costs to rebuild the bridge and all the damage suffered from the state through the lawsuits that were recently announced. Regarding MDOT's finances, as you may recall, last year CTP required $3.3 billion in reductions between operating capital budgets. Thanks to the governor's one-time funding from the state's rainy day fund, an additional estimated $1.8 billion in revenues passed by the General Assembly last year, MDOT was able to reduce the level of reductions needed to balance the budget. For example, with those funds, we were able to maintain the commitments to the highway user revenue, which you mentioned earlier, Mayor, and also the local operated transit grants. Turning now to this year's draft CTP for fiscal years 25 through 30, the department continues to face significant budgetary challenges because of the state's low economic growth, the rising cost of labor and materials, and revenues coming in lower than projections. For example, the motor fuel tax revenue, the Transportation Trust Fund's largest source, have come in lower than projected by roughly $350 million, while at the same time, operating costs have increased by $300 million. As a result of these financial pressures, the department is making strategic investments with our limited resources to further enhance the safety of our system and maintain its operations. Getting into the details, the draft CTP is balanced and totals $18.9 billion. However, because of the fiscal constraints, we had to make tough decisions and reductions to live within our means. This resulted in a reduction of $1.3 billion compared to the last final CTP. Even with these reductions, MDOT is committed to strategically using available resources to advance the state's priorities. The number one priority is safety, the safety of everyone who uses the transportation system, including those who walk, bike, and work on the transportation network. For example, this summer I signed an updated department-wide complete streets policy. The updated policy will support Maryland's Vision Zero goal to rapidly reduce traffic fatalities and serious injuries to zero by 2030. Additionally, we continue to partner with local governments to seek federal grants to invest in needed traffic calming and pedestrian safety improvements. This includes Port of Baltimore's submission of a federal Reconnecting Communities grant for the Masonville Cove Connector shared use path here in Baltimore City. In addition to our focus on safety, the department will continue to make strategic investments that support Maryland's families, Baltimore City families, and the economy of the state. Some examples include advancing electric vehicle charging stations and new federally funded resiliency and carbon reduction projects across the state, funding the Howard Street Tunnel to support the growth of the Port of Baltimore with its creation of thousands of family-sustaining jobs, funding the AB Connector project to support continued operations and passenger experience at BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport, funding the Frederick Douglass Tunnel project with Amtrak, supporting the project development process for the Baltimore Red Line, and advancing public infrastructure work and enhancements for the FBI headquarters relocation to Greenbelt, Maryland. That concludes my opening remarks. Now let me turn to the presentation over to Administrator Arnold at the Maryland Transit Administration to begin the local updates from the modes. Holly?
All right, good morning. It's great to be here and see everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak this morning. For the record, my name is Holly Arnold, and I'm the Administrator of the Maryland Transit Administration. A safe, reliable, and rider-focused public transit system remains key to growing and strengthening our state. It means decreased carbon emissions, a reduction in traffic congestion, and safer streets. A robust public transit system also means economic and social mobility. In fiscal year 2024, MTA's $1.3 billion in spending had an economic impact of $2.9 billion for our state. The work that we do supported over 24,000 jobs across the state. The draft CTP continues strategic investment in transit here in the Baltimore region. Notably, the draft CTP includes project development funding for the Red Line, an investment of more than $150 million going toward this vitally important investment in Baltimore's transit infrastructure. We appreciate the support and partnership of city staff for this project, and we look forward to participating in public open houses with your team later this week. Work also continues on the Frederick Douglass Tunnel. The tunnel will provide significant safety, reliability, and speed improvements for MARC, in addition to a new ADA-accessible West Baltimore MARC station. We're completing major state-of-good repair investments in our Metro subway system, with several new cars having already arrived and undergoing testing. Our Metro project also includes investment in a state-of-the-art communications-based train control system that's being tested right now. With that said, as the Secretary mentioned, the draft CTP does reflect some difficult choices to defer some state-of-good repair investments. However, I want to be clear that safety remains our top priority. Regular inspections and repairs will continue to ensure the system is safe and reliable for our riders. More than 59% of the CTP supports keeping our systems operating. In addition to MTA's investments, locally operated transit systems are critical partners in providing transit throughout the state. MTA implemented a new funding allocation formula, which has made the distributions more equitable and responsive to changes in local jurisdictions' investment in transit service. The new formula benefits Baltimore City with an increase of more than $960,000 in operating funds for the Charm City Circulator. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I'd now like to turn it over to Bruce Gardner from MDTA.
Thank you, Holly. For the record, Bruce Gardner, Executive Director of the MDTA. I'd like to start by just saying how much we really appreciate the support from everyone in the immediate aftermath of the collapse of the Key Bridge. It has been a busy 6 months for the MDTA. In that time, we have received a categorical exclusion for our NEPA classification for the rebuild, awarded the Progressive Design Build contract to Kiewit and started working with them just last month in September on the rebuild. And we've also have RFPs out on the street for our different consulting engineers that will support our effort on the MDTA side of the effort. The engagement with local communities over the next 6 months to a year is going to be particularly important. Elected officials, small and minority business enterprises, they're all critical to the project's success. The replacement of the bridge will be designed and built with local inputs in mind and to industry standards. The bridge rebuild should begin construction in 2025, and at this time we anticipate that completion date of the fall of 2028. I know many of your constituents are feeling the impacts of the traffic on I-95 and 895 through the tunnel, particularly in the morning in that southbound direction, the evening in the northbound direction. We have adjusted our lane configurations of 895 at the toll plazas, but that project that we did have on the books even prior to the Key Bridge collapse has been slightly delayed because of the traffic volumes that we're having on 895. We simply can't interrupt that traffic, and we're looking at ways to deliver that project through some different alternatives and address some of the city street improvements around the that plaza on the south side of the Harbor Tunnel, and then after the Key Bridge is up and running, address the bigger components. So lastly, I'd just like to echo the Secretary's comments about our efforts to hold the owners of the ship accountable and working closely with the Attorney General's office. That will be an endeavor that we will be taking in the midst of the rebuild. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention today. I'll turn it now over to Will Pines from SHA.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and good morning, everyone. I'm Will Pines. Sorry about that. State Highway Administrator. At SHA, we understand the fiscal challenges that Maryland is facing. However, I want to assure you of two things. One, we'll continue to do big things, moving forward with multimodal projects that improve safety, accessibility, mobility, and equity. Second, safety will always be our highest priority. This means building and maintaining a system that supports pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and all users, including our highway workers. SHA has been a proud partner with the MDOT team on the new Complete Streets policy, and we're putting the policy into action with our Complete Streets Leadership Academy projects. Another important statewide initiative is the work we're doing on the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI program. We successfully procured our first round contract to install charging stations to fill gaps in key corridors around the state. Statewide, we are contracted to install 22 EV charging stations with a total of 126 ports. We will continue to leverage these federal dollars to build out our charging network to help ensure motorists driving EVs can travel without range anxieties in Maryland. I'd like to highlight a few projects and thank the city for its support and partnership on these. SHA is proud of the relationship with Baltimore City DOT and the collaboration on the Active Transportation Federal Discretionary Grant Program projects. Under the Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP, the critical trail and crossing projects such as the Baltimore Greenway rails along the Middle Branch connecting the Gwynn Falls Trail to the Inner Harbor is currently under design, and the design for the new South Arlington Street crossing is also underway. Through TAP, the city was awarded construction funding for necessary intersection improvements at Light and Pratt Street, Calvert and Pratt Street, as well as President and Pratt Street. These improvements include upgrading to high visibility crosswalks, audible and visual pedestrian signals, ADA ramp upgrades, and pedestrian and bicyclist signing. Construction is anticipated to be completed next year, and we've also been poised to support the city on their awards in the Safe Routes to School program. Design is underway for the improvements to pedestrian infrastructure at several elementary and middle schools. We're also working closely with Baltimore City DOT to move the final design to convert 2 miles of sidewalk into shared use path to provide a safe route to Mother Mary Lang Catholic School on Martin Luther King Boulevard. Finally, I'm pleased to highlight 2 new grants which were recently announced by Governor Moore to advance the city's connectivity projects. Baltimore City DOT received 2 TAP grants awarding $2 million to complete the design of the 2.8-mile trail between Lake Montebello and Druid Park Lake Drive as part of the Baltimore Greenway Trails network, and nearly $500,000 to complete design for a half-mile segment of the Jones Falls Trail on the south side of Falls Road. Baltimore City Department of Planning was awarded $177,000 through the Safe Routes to Schools program for the design of safety enhancements around Cecil Elementary School. Finally, through the Kim Lanfear's Bikeway program, the city will receive $200,000 for design of a shared use path connecting Heron Run Trail to another planned north-south trail, and $96,000 to help convert quick-built separate bike lanes into permanent infrastructure on Harford Road. Congratulations to the city on those grants, and SHA looks forward to our continued partnership on delivering connectivity improvements for Baltimore City and through these programs. Thank you again for your time, and now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Chrissy Nizer with the MVA.
Thank you, Will. Good morning. My pleasure to be here. For the record, Chrissy Nizer, MVA Administrator. At MVA, customer service has certainly always been at the center of everything we do, but we've really committed ourselves to this new vision of premier customer service. And it's exciting to see that that's been reflected in our customer satisfaction rating, which is actually 99% at this point, a real source of pride for our MVA employees. By prioritizing efficiency as well as accessibility in fiscal year 24, our MVA average wait time was just 5 minutes, despite the fact that we completed 6.7% more transactions than the prior year. And that is a record for MVA in terms of low wait time. We do and continue to encourage customers to sign up for their MyMBA account so you can take advantage of the many online services 24 hours a day at your convenience. And we also continue to expand our one-stop shop approach to government with the idea that our customers don't necessarily care whether it's a state, local, or federal organization. They just want to be able to take care of their business at one location. The Baltimore City branch office is a great example of that, where we have the ability to issue Maryland birth certificates to individuals who may need that document if they're getting that ID card or getting a driver's license. And we just last week expanded that thanks to the support of the legislature to be able to issue death certificates. And the reason for that is, unfortunately, if somebody has lost a relative and they're transferring that title, the last thing we want to do is to have to turn them away to go get that death certificate and come back to us, obviously a difficult time. So really proud of that new enhancement, and Baltimore City is the first office to start issuing those. In the ongoing efforts to reach all members of the community, our outreach teams have partners with local organizations to provide critical services to unhoused and reentry populations. As of October 1, thanks to our legislative support, the MBA can issue free ID cards to vulnerable populations that include customers who are unhoused, permanently disabled, or youth under the care of the Department of Juvenile Services. Our continued partnerships with the food projects is something we're really proud of and has been very beneficial. We provide law permit testing in the community to more than 120 people a month. We also are now offering the law test at several high schools in Baltimore City as of this year. Ourselves and our partners certainly remain committed to our Vision Zero goal, as you've heard already. In September, Governor Moore announced some assistance for that and more than $1.8 million in highway safety grants, both to organizations as well as our law enforcement partners here in the city to address distracted, impaired, aggressive driving, as well as pedestrian and bicycle safety. I really like to commend Baltimore City for adopting a local strategic highway safety plan and bringing our partners together. We truly believe that is one way that is critical to help us all reach our shared goal of Vision Zero. In closing, I'd just like to take a moment to thank our MVA employees. None of this good work happens without the great work that they do every day, and certainly so proud of the effort that they bring to the table. So thank you, and at this time, I will turn it over to the Maryland Aviation Administration Deputy Chief of Airport Finance. And knock over the phone.
My name is Dan Favreau. I'm the Deputy Chief of Airport Finance over at the MAA. I'm here sitting in for our CEO, Ricky Smith. The Maryland Aviation Administration system propels economic activity and global connectivity for the state of Maryland. Our public use airports across the state are economic engines that contribute to job growth and business development. As the busiest airport in the region for both passengers and cargo traffic, BWI Marshall is a major transportation resource and economic asset to the state. The airport produces an annual economic impact of $11.3 billion and supports over 100,000 jobs throughout the region. As a service update, BWI Marshall has recovered and surpassed pre-pandemic passenger levels. As Governor Moore recently announced, it was a record-setting summer for us. In both all-time monthly passenger record in both June and July at 2.6 million passengers coming through the airport. In our capital program, we're advancing important projects that will enhance BWI Marshall for passengers and provide important facilities for our partners. As Secretary Wiedefeld mentioned, the AB Connector and Baggage Handling Project is the largest capital program project in our history. It's going to double the baggage system capacity for Southwest. It's a major project that will be largely complete by December of 2025, and we look forward to the new enhancements for our customers as well as Southwest Airlines. The MAA continues to support 33 public use airports around the state that serve communities. For the statewide aviation grant program that provides important support, MAA intends to award $3.5 million in funding through fiscal year 25 for regional airports across the state. Thank you, and I will now hand it over to Brian at the Port of Maryland.
Morning. Morning, I'm Brian Miller, Deputy Executive Director of Operations for the Maryland Port Administration. I'm standing in for Jonathan Daniels, the Executive Director, who unfortunately can be with us today. Thank you and good morning, everyone. The Port of Baltimore continues to make great progress in our recovery. Of course, our numbers would have been higher before the elision and corresponding bridge collapse. Our most recent cargo numbers from August showed year-to-year gains of 31% for cars and 28% for breakbulk cargoes. We're handling more than 90% of the ships that we were handling a year ago and have seen a significant increase in the number of trucks coming in and out of the port. We're now averaging about 3,300 trucks a day, which is 1,000 more than in August and nearly back to our average of 3,500 per day pre-incident. Ports America Chesapeake is handling about 80% of the container volume it was handling a year ago, and then we saw a second strong half of the summer for containers. On the cruise, everybody likes cruise. Our cruise ships, Carnival Pride and Royal Caribbean's Vision of the Seas, were able to restart operations and once again are sailing to exciting locales like the Bahamas, Bermuda, Caribbean, New England, and Canada. The Port of Baltimore has become a very popular cruise port for not only Marylanders, but people from as far south as North Carolina, as far north as New York, and as far west as Michigan. We're excited about our in-transit port calls, which bring different brands to the Port of Baltimore. In November, we welcome Azamara Cruise Line, and in 2006, we will welcome Ada Cruises from Germany and high-end Crystal Cruises. Each of these cruise lines bring different itineraries and experiences and further helps to build our cruise profile. On to the Howard Street Tunnel, we're working very closely with CSX on the Howard Street Tunnel project, which will give us the ability to handle double-stack containers on rail. Will be finished in 2006, increase our business by 160,000 containers annually, and will be creating 13,000 jobs. We're also embarking on a new 20-year strategic master plan that will grow our business and generate additional good-paying, family-supporting jobs. The advantages of the Port of Baltimore have not changed. We are still the closest port, East Coast port to the Midwest, providing cost savings for our customers. We are in the top 5 national consumer market with more than 70% of our inbound containers destined within 70 miles of our port. And we also have a very highly skilled and experienced International Longshoremen's Association labor force. Also, we're an excellent e-commerce port with many distribution, warehousing, and fulfillment facilities located in our region. In closing, the Port of Baltimore is Maryland's port. While we welcome these positive developments, we are, however, still assessing the damages and long-term impacts caused by the port shutdown and the loss of the Key Bridge. We have joined in the state's legal action that seeks to hold the Dolly's owner and management accountable for the state's damages. Thank you for your time this morning, and I'll now turn it back to the Secretary.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mayor, again, for your attention and the patience for us to go through the program. And I just wanted to end by, again, thanking your staff. We work very closely with them on a series of issues across the city, and that partnership will continue into the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Secretary, and thank you, team. We will now go to the stakeholder questions and remarks. We'll start with our state delegation, Madam Chair. And I know we were joined by Delegate Addison, also my delegate of the 45th District, meaning that every delegate from the 45th District is here, so I feel well represented.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to thank the mayor and DOT director for helping organize this, as well as Secretary Wiedefeld and your staff and the Moore Miller administration. I think that a lot of really great things were outlined in the presentation this morning. We cannot turn an eye to the response of the state when it came to the Key Bridge, and a lot of other investments that are taking place here to expand our accessibility for folks, whether you are walking, biking, or using public transportation. But I think just in terms of context, something I really want to hone in on is when we talk about recovery, right? So we talked about the importance of the port, right? We know how significant the port is in terms of driving economic revenue across the state, how much is important to the vitality of revenue here in Baltimore City. And I think it's been amazing how we've been able to respond to that recovery in the light of tragedy that happened with the Key Bridge collapse. But I think, though, what I know has been already outlined by the mayor and by our DOT secretary, and I know will follow in remarks from my colleagues, both at the state and at the city level, is that we know that we have to continue to support the economic recovery of Baltimore City. And we know that in order to do that, we have to continue to bring more people into our city. We have to make sure that the people who are here stay in this city, and we have to make sure the people that we bring in stay in the city. We want to bring in more businesses as well. We want to make sure that everyone who lives here can access all the resources that are necessary for them to live and thrive. And we know that transportation is vital to that. And so what I would implore the Moore Miller administration, implore MDOT, is that we know that MTA funding is core for our recovery as a city. And we know that that recovery is also very central to growing our state economy and supporting that revenue. And so I know that a lot of folks that follow are going to really dig into the nuts and bolts and the meat of what that looks like, but we know that we have to ensure that we restore our MTA funding to the state of good repair of at least the 2022 CNI. And we know that a lot of our constituents, we get the letters and emails, they're depending on us to get this right. And so I just want to thank you again for the presentation, but I also want to make it very, very clear that we need more funding for MTA, and that we cannot this cannot be the best comeback story. This cannot be Baltimore's time if we don't make that investment in MTA, in the MTA that we need to make sure that our system is able to support residents, is able to get people around. And we know that when we restore that MTA funding, it's going to help improve our overall transit system, right? We're seeing a lot of more a pressure on other transit systems like our buses that also have a need for improvement, but the buses can't deliver on the needs of our residents if light rail is not able to do what it has to do. So I thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to working with you and being partners in getting what Baltimore needs in terms of funding for MTA. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. We're going to other state delegates. Delegate Smith. Delegate Brown. Delegate Lewis.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Secretary, Madam Director, Madam Administrator, team, thank you all for all you do. Thank you for convening us this morning so that we can have a little bit of a come to your, whoever you call your higher power this morning, because this is where we gather every year to talk in really clear terms and to speak the truth about what our agencies need and what our people need, what our city and region need. So in the past, I was shy, but I don't feel shy anymore because we're at a once-in-a-generation moment. We've made a lot of promises to the people of Baltimore City, our region, and the state. We promised to improve education. We promised to invest in our infrastructure. We promised to repair the harms of the past. We made a lot of promises. And the people were listening when we made those promises. So I go to sleep every night, wake up every morning thinking, what did I do today to deliver on the promises we made? And I know my colleagues do too. And I know you folks in our agencies do too. You guys are good at your jobs. Well, our job is to get you the resources that you need. So I'm thinking right now less about the nuts and bolts of the amazing Complete Streets policy enhancements that you've delivered. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and how the agencies are doing their best to implement. I think less about the centimeters of bike lane that we're going to build in Baltimore this year, because I know we're going to get to that 100-mile plan. I know we're going to do it. Less about the engineering that goes along with the rebuilding of the Key Bridge, which is so important. I'm thinking about how are we going to raise the money that you guys need to do your jobs? How are we going to raise the money to deliver what we promised the people of the city and region? We cannot go home from session in April unless we figure that out. So I'll close my remarks and then start my questions, but I'll close my remarks by saying simply that I make a commitment to you, Mr. Secretary, and to your agencies, that I will do everything I can, even if it means getting in trouble, to raise the revenue that you need. I hope that you'll consider me a partner. Some of us really, really, really wanted to get you the revenue this last year, and we weren't able to do that. But we're going to keep our promises to the people. So that's the end of my remarks. Here are my questions. I learned the other day that the impact of the Key Bridge collapse is multifaceted. There are environmental impacts, air quality, debris and pollution. There are all sorts of sort of material impacts, but there are also quality of life impacts. My understanding from what I learned from the City DOT director the other day is that diversion of traffic from that would normally use the bridge is diverting onto the streets of our city and increasing at rates, and don't quote me, but significant rates that people actually feel. So Key Bridge traffic is moving from, whatever, like highway spur. You guys know I don't own a car, so I don't even remember the highways. But there's a highway that people take, come into the city, and they cut through our neighborhoods, right? Folks who are working, teachers, firefighters, students, tourists, our fellow residents from around the state trying to get here. And they don't mean to do it, but they're congesting our streets and polluting our air for those who are still using fuel-powered vehicles. They're increasing the risk of vehicle crashes, increasing the risk of pedestrian injury and death, just because they are trying to get where they need to go. And the impacts are being felt in our city right now. So my question, Mr. Secretary, if you would direct this question wherever it needs to go, my question is, how will we work with you to ensure that the negative impacts of increased traffic congestion, particularly air quality and pedestrian safety, will be mitigated in the coming years until the new bridge is built? And beyond, may I say.
Sure.
And beyond.
No, thank you. It does begin with partnerships with the city as we work through those issues. I spoke earlier about the Maryland commuter choice programs that we have in effect to get people out of their cars, to think differently about how they do that. We also need to make sure we're taking a very close look at any truck traffic and restricting it where it makes sense. We've been working on some of the signalization, for instance, to make things go smoothly as possible. We will continue to monitor any pedestrian-related potential issues, but we are 4 years into this. I mean, is the reality. It will take us, and that is extremely aggressive, to rebuild that bridge in 4 years. So that is our major focus, to make sure we get that, we don't miss a beat there. At the same time, again, working with the partnership with the city to do everything we can possible. But you literally, with almost 40,000 vehicles a day that historically use that, they are permeating throughout the whole system, and we're seeing it every day. And I wish I could magically make it go away, but all we can do is work together and try to knock down as many things as we can during that period.
Well, thank you for that answer. I hope what we will try to do while we're accelerating that rebuild, at the same time, leverage that rebuild, leverage that investment to do the improvements we need at the street level and neighborhood level, to improve complete streets, pedestrian safety, to increase connectivity across neighborhoods, leverage it to build out the Greenway Trails network. I mean, this is a once in a lifetime. So, I could say a lot more, but I have so many smart colleagues who are chomping at the bit. But I just want to underscore that the Key Bridge rebuild and the Frederick Douglass Tunnel enhancement are levers that we can push to drive investment for other projects. Because those efforts do not stand alone. They're connected to everything else we want to do. So you guys have been really patient. I really could stay here.
Thank you.
But onward and upward, we're really going to have to fight, and some of us are ready to fight. Seriously. Gently, but seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Morning, everybody.
Morning, Tyler.
Great to see you. Thank you so much for your time and your hard work. And everybody else from MDOT and the modal agencies that are here too, you are all incredibly dedicated professionals, and you are doing, without a doubt, the best that you can in a tough situation. For us, I think we just want to make the point as clearly as possible that while you are making tough and important decisions, the draft CTP as it is simply does not make the investment in the Baltimore region that this region needs and deserves. And we are confident that in partnership with you all, the Moore-Miller administration will do everything that it needs to make sure that the final CTP does make those necessary investments. I just want to level set on a couple of the numbers that were discussed today. The overall CTP is about $19 billion. That is still a massive number. While we've had to make some significant cuts, at the end of the day, the question is, what is going to get us the best return on investment? And as Governor Moore stated when he announced the mode of the Red Line, that project itself will bring thousands of jobs, billions of dollars of investment to the city and to the region and to the state. This is the time when we need to be thinking about how do we best grow our state's economy? How do we make people want to move into the city and into the state, grow our population, and stay here for the long term? And the number one thing that young people are looking at when they decide where they want to move to is how easily can I get around? People don't want to drive a car. They want to be able to get around in a way that they can use the bus, they can use the train, they can walk, they can bike. Those are the people that we want to be bringing to the city. Those are the choice riders that we want to bring to the city. We have to be investing in a system that helps folks who are reliant on the system and who choose to use the system. So if we think about, for example, the light rail, we've had a lot of exciting events happen in the city recently, playoff baseball, incredible concerts. So many of those folks that have come into the city have done so using the light rail. And then unfortunately, when they've wanted to leave, there have been delays and slowdowns and negative news story after negative news story because of the current state of the light rail. You talked about the approximately $1.3 billion less in this year's CTP. About $672 million of that is the MTA alone. The biggest capital investment in recent history in MTA is building the Purple Line, which connects Prince George's County to Montgomery County. What we want is the right level of investment in Baltimore City and in the Baltimore region. So I just want to ask you a couple questions about the light rail in particular. In the current draft CTP, are we going to be able to procure what we need to do to keep the federal grant that we have been awarded for $213 million to overhaul our light rail system? If we don't make any changes to the CTP as it is, are we going to be able to complete and accomplish that program?
So I think I'm glad you said the word program, because it is truly a program. The vehicles are one piece of it, the stations are another piece, maintenance facility, and then the signal system that the Secretary always likes to talk about on the Purple Line. It's that visible thing that exists that allows us to actually do everything we need to do. So it all is an entire program. So we won the grant for the vehicles last year. That was matched by some of our federal formula dollars and $90 million from the state, thanks to the Secretary. So we're good on the vehicle side. We do need additional funding. We're short about $380 million for the rest of the program to do that. So we're having lots of conversations every day because we know how important this is, but currently we are short in the program period, and we want to see what we can do in the final CTP.
So am I correct in my understanding then that if we're not able to come up with that $380 million, we're going to have the money to purchase the vehicles and have nothing to do with them because they don't work with our current system?
So, I mean, because it's a program, we're really tying all the procurements together. I mean, I think ideally we would go out early next year for the vehicles. We may wait a little bit based on what the final CTP looks like and the funding. But again, the Secretary recognizes the importance of this. We have lots of conversations about how we can be creative, yes.
But to your point, Delegate, yes, we need the dollars to do the entire system, right? Whether it's the vehicles, whether it's the systems work, and the stations, all that has to be done. So we're going to have to wrestle with this issue between now and the final, and obviously during the legislative cycle, that, okay, we have to reinvest in this system. We're not going to walk away from it, right? We've got to do that. But right now, we don't have the dollars to show it, but basically that is the discussion we need to have.
Okay, I appreciate that. And if the draft CTP remains and becomes the final, and which would mean we don't have the money right now to invest in that system, I'd like to get a sense of what is the near-term and medium-term outlook for our light rail system as it is. My understanding is we are currently running on the minimum number of power substations. Am I correct about that?
You're correct, yes. There's a few areas in particular where if the traction power substation went down, we wouldn't have service, the BWI spur in particular.
Okay. And so if one of those substations goes down, what is the result of that?
We'll have to do a bus bridge in those areas.
Okay. And so for that, wherever that substation is, would have no light rail service until that substation is repaired or a new one is procured. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And what about our vehicles? What is the status of the life cycle of our current light rail cars? Because obviously this federal program is intended for us to purchase new vehicles that would bring us into, I want to say, this century. If we do that, if we are not able to do that, what does that mean for the current status of our vehicles and the system itself?
So the current vehicles are either at or approaching useful life. We'll get there within the next, I believe, 4 years. Our team is working every day to increase vehicle availability. We've got a couple things that are happening simultaneously. So one, there's a number of accident vehicles. We've had a number of crashes with vehicles, unfortunately, and so those cars are kind of out of service while we look to see if they can possibly have repairs for them. That's longer term. There's a number that are still working through the warranty process and some of the issues with our Alstom, our contractor, on that, and so we're working closely with them. And then the rest are just ones that we're maintaining and we're having other issues with, parts availability, things like that. So we're attacking each of those separately. We're working closely with Alstom. We are bringing on some additional support to help with the vehicles themselves, looking at potentially adding some additional staff so that we can really focus on the amount of work that it takes. There's more corrective maintenance because they're older vehicles, and so we need to do more work on that. So we're really attacking that on all three fronts there.
Okay, understood. I appreciate that. I just want to make sure my understanding is correct, though, that if we are not able to make the investments in the system, should we expect that the kinds of delays, malfunctions, emergency maintenance that we've seen recently will continue and potentially exacerbate?
In the short term, I would expect us to continue to run single car, maybe 2-car vehicles and supplement with buses, yes.
Okay. And beyond, let's say 5 years from now, if we haven't been able to make this investment, what is the status of our light rail system at that point?
I can't predict, but I mean, the vehicles are continuing to decline in reliability, and so I would anticipate, further delays, further issues. We'd have to supplement with buses.
Okay. So obviously, in doing so, that would then also put additional pressure on the rest of the system to have to deal with the lacking reliability and service of the light rail system.
Yes.
So for anybody that needs the light rail to get to where they need to go, it's not going to be there for them. And for anybody who would choose to use the light rail, they're going to have to choose something else.
Yes.
Okay. Talking big picture for a minute, which is, I think what's in everybody's minds ultimately in this room and around the city is the potential for this generational project that was taken away from us and has been restored under the Moore-Miller administration, which is the Red Line. In order for us to build that project, we're going to need billions of dollars of federal funding. In order for us to get that federal funding, we're going to have to apply to the federal government for that money. Am I correct that criteria that the federal government look at when determining whether or not to give that money are things like, is the system running in a state of good repair? Are you actively running a reliable system? And also, have you been able to implement previous federal grant funds that you have received?
Yes, I mean, they're tied together, is the reality. And the same issues that you just went through, Delegate, is what needs to be addressed so that we can be more competitive when it's at that stage of the process. So we're well aware of that these two are linked. And we're going to have to deal with both of them at the same time as we go after those federal dollars.
So if we underfund the state of good repair in our system and aren't able to accomplish the light rail overhaul project, am I correct that that would negatively impact our application to the federal government for the Red Line funding?
It would.
Yes.
Okay. In 2018, the legislature, as you know, passed the Transportation Safety and Investment Act, which required a minimum level of state of good repair funding each year, a basic minimum level of state of good repair funding each year. Am I correct that in the draft CTP we have right now, that basic minimum level would not be hit?
Yes.
And so in that scenario, am I correct that you would have to come to the legislature and request that we change that prior legislation to lower the basic level of state of good repair funding that would be necessary?
Yes.
Okay. Are we coming to the legislature to lower any funding for WMATA in the upcoming session?
Yes, they have very similar issues in their out-year program as well, on the capital side, on the maintenance side, so we'll have to deal with that as well.
Okay. Do you have a sense on how much WMATA's capital funding will increase or decrease in the this year's CTP?
Not off the top of my head, but I can get it for you.
Okay. It is my understanding that WMATA's capital funding will increase by $26.7 million over last year's CTP funding levels to this year, whereas for MTA, the capital funding is increasing, but that's because of the purple line, and our state of good repair funding is decreasing. So the point that I would make there is we understand that it is complicated and expensive for the state to run two major transit systems. It is not our intent to have you cannibalize WMATA for the benefit of MTA. but it is also expressly antithetical to what we want to see happen, to have MTA be harmed so that we can fully fund WMATA, particularly for the folks of the Baltimore region that my colleague, Delegate Lewis, made such an excellent point that we have made promises to, that we have made commitments to for them and for their children, and frankly, for the future of the economic growth of the state of Maryland. We have got to keep these promises. So I appreciate immensely all the work that you are doing and for your time today. We are ready to work with you and the Moore Miller administration to ensure that when this is a final CTP, it makes the appropriate investments in the Baltimore region.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Delegate Malcolm Ruff. Great to see you, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Administrator, all the administrators. Thank you very much for your hard work and dedication to your top priorities, which what I've heard today is safety, but I've also heard equity. And I also am very clear that where we put our money is a moral decision. It's very much a decision that encompasses equity. And so my brother, who sits on our subcommittee for Transportation and Environment of Appropriations Committee, has painted a very bleak picture. I think you guys would have to agree with that. And it gives us a lot of heartburn, especially somebody like myself who grew up riding the M3 to the 44 just to get to school every day. I also think about our seniors and our vulnerable riders. And so my question really focuses more on our subway system, because my colleague has done a great job dealing with other aspects of the system. So I won't be before you long, but I do want to say that I hope that we are very prepared to have serious conversations about changing the numbers, because this, as it stands, with half of the cuts being in Baltimore City, essentially, does not meet the muster for us. And so specifically, I want to know what we're supposed to tell our constituents. And I represent the 41st District, where 3 of the above-ground subway stations are located. Escalators are extremely important. I have a lot of elderly residents in my district. And so how are we going to justify not investing the dollars necessary to upgrade our system so that people can safely get on and off of the subway systems that are essential to their egress and travel throughout the city, about essentially their freedom of being able to move about and to earn money and to gain resources. What are we supposed to tell them when their buses aren't on time, when their buses are not in good repair? What is the message that our budget document, our moral document, is telling to the people that are in the margins that are going to need those escalators coming up soon and are going to need that bus to be on time so they can get to work?
I think that, as we've talked sort of globally here, that we need to reinvest in the system, both systems, the rail systems, all 3 systems, meaning in the Washington region and in the Baltimore region, light rail and metro. These are huge capital investments that have been made over decades that are aging out. And we need to basically figure out how we're going to fund those, because we can't walk away from either one of them.
Understood. I will concede to my other colleagues, but I don't think that we are hearing what's necessary at this point. I hope that we will have a conversation that is outside of TSIA, where we can figure out how to restore these projects that are essential to our residents here in Baltimore City.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, members of the administration, members of the city administration, as we all know, this is the second time around for the Red Line. And you have been very forthcoming in working with neighborhoods and making them aware of what will be happening, the decisions we need to make. As typified by the fact that this coming weekend, or this coming week, there will be meetings. I would like to just take you back to the meeting more than a dozen years ago at Edmondson Senior High, when one of our constituents, stood up to say he lived in the Edmondson Village community because his house was taken to build the road, the highway to nowhere. And we worked with your predecessor, actually it was the O'Malley administration, it was that long ago, to protect people. Collaboratively, we worked with you, your predecessors, to protect people from their house being condemned yet again. And we've begun discussions on that with you already. And I just want to speak on behalf of the residents in our district, in the Edmondson Avenue corridor, as well as throughout the city, who might be affected, but would not be effective if we do the right thing. And I think that's consistent with building your plans for the Red Line. So that is the one specific issue that I would like to bring to everyone's attention today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. First of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for providing us this opportunity to talk. My colleagues have pretty much said it all. Delegate Lewis talked about promises that seem yet to bear any fruit. You've heard my colleague lay out essentially what the state of good repair funding loss does from now and further. You heard about essentially those who remember losing it all, per se. A home, I think, is sacred to lose it all for something that never came to be. And I want to talk about something we don't talk about often, are the people. The people who use this service every day. They pay for a service that works. They pay for a service that doesn't work. They pay for a service that's consistent or inconsistent. There's some of us who choose, and there's some of us who have to choose to use these services. And every day I think about it. I think about my own time taking the bus to college from Baltimore County, taking the M6 to the 44, to the 8 and 11, to get to class by 9 o'clock. My day started at 7:30. I remember that, but it came. And when it didn't come, I had to make a plan to find out another bus that went another direction. I really want to talk about the fact that when we don't fund our priorities and we understand funding, what we fund and what we don't fund speaks to our priorities, and it doesn't feel like we are being, again, prioritized. We are not a priority, and yet we have to provide a service that people pay for every day. Every day. It's not like getting a bad milk from the grocery store. I can take it back and get my money back. These are folks who essentially are dumping money in a system, whether they want to or whether they have to get around. And I think we owe it to them to make this a priority. And I will be working with not only our delegation, but our local council to ensure that the budget reflects the priorities of the people who need to get in and around this city and the priorities that this region needs to be successful. So we hope that we will be in partnership to do so, because I understand that we can't right now, but when we really want something, when something is really a priority, we find a way, and we look forward to finding a way.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Come on, folks, we're not awake. For the record, I'm Delegate Stephanie Smith, no longer the chair of the Baltimore City delegation. Not mad about that. It's been 5.5 years, and I'm so glad that we have Delegate Melissa Wells stepping up. I do think it's worthwhile, before I ask my question, to kind of level set kind of the history of our delegation's interaction with these types of roadshows. I think that there's almost a lag in the perception that the Baltimore City delegation is not vocal about transit or transportation needs. And I think that needs to be addressed. Many of us were elected in 2018, and the dean of the delegation was elected in, you know when, you were elected. And so I think There has been sometimes a lackadaisical maybe approach, or maybe people not speaking up as often. But I want to say that we not only have, and Delegate Robin Lewis, someone who started the Citizens PAC around the red line. We not only have Delegate Mark Edelson, who is a transportation lawyer, I think you may have noticed, during, in his real life. And we also have 2 members of the delegation on the Environment and Transportation Subcommittee for Appropriations, Delegate Edelson and Delegate Ruff. And then during my tenure, we started a transportation committee, a standing committee of the delegation, of which the chair is Robin Lewis, vice chair Mark Edelson. And last year, some of you may have interacted with our transportation town hall that we had at Morgan State. And so I want to say, and then of course, the vice chair of Environment and Transportation, a standing committee of the MGA, is no other than Delegate Regina T. Boyce. And so I think that any type of dated or historical sense that the Baltimore City delegation is disengaged or uninformed is no longer valid and not relevant. And so we not only have people who care about transit and transportation, we have people that have expertise in the topic, and we all stand with great expectation that you will rise to the occasion for the people that we represent. Now, something I do also want to lift up is I think Delegate Edelson was very eloquent in noting that we are not mad at our sister jurisdictions in the DC Metro for getting what they need to support their residents. But I do tire of always seeming to be in a posture where we have to politely beg to maintain a status quo that is in itself inadequate and not meeting the needs currently. And so while others are moving ahead, and we are not even sometimes calling for parity, we're simply asking to stay in the game, I think we can tell that that runs contrary to the notions of equity that we've heard invoked in this room. It runs contrary to even a commitment to this being Baltimore's moment and Maryland's time and decade. All of that high-minded rhetoric has to be paired with resources. Otherwise, it's a hollow convention. And so for me, I think that we don't want to be here a year from now, again in the same posture, begging to get back to status quo that doesn't work. We want to see movement forward, and we all know that requires resources. I'm on appropriations, we spend the money, used to be on Ways and Means, we got the money. And so we know that there's going to be a lot of tough conversations in the next session about how we are able to meet our needs. Now, I'm the chair of Education and Economic Development for Appropriations, and we all know you're not going to have a lot of education equity or robust economic development if you have an inadequate transportation system that you're relying upon. And when I speak about education specifically, the other 23 counties do not have students that are relying on public transportation to get where they need to go for their education. And so we note that education is a public good, but transportation is also a public good. So from one public good to the other, the investments have to be able to help residents maximize their accessibility to that public good. And right now, I do not believe if any other jurisdiction had students that relied upon public transit to access the public good of education, that we would be so comfortable allowing it to be so inadequate for so long. We're making incredible investments in the Blueprint for Maryland's Future to improve the experience of education. The children have to be able to get to the school to access those investments we're making in the buildings that they're trying to get to. And in Baltimore City, particularly at the high school level, kids could be going to schools that are not in their neighborhood. There are young people that are testing into some of our most competitive high schools and cannot reliably get there because of our inadequate investments in light rail and because our other programmatic investments do not meet their needs. So my question for you is, as you're assessing the investments you're making in light rail or any other aspect of your program, what does the impact on school children who are a disproportionate user of this public good, how does the impact on them impact your formulas or your decision-making about the investments in the MTA?
Yeah, I think whether it's students, whether it's people that need to get to health facilities, across the board, we need that base level of service to do that. And you're correct, we're not performing at that level. We recognize it. We have a path forward. We need the resources to get there. Right. And so I think we're speaking the same language on where we're trying to get to, but we also need the resources to do it.
So are you going to help us get those resources?
I'm very supportive of basically making this transit system and all transit systems throughout the state to the level that they meet the community needs.
So what I'm hearing is that as we are all singing from the same hymnal, the first stanza, I think, was led by the mayor. You've heard some subsequent stanzas since, and I'm sure we'll hear more from our council members as well. The commitment to the need for more improved transit is in this room, and the partnership to find the resources to make that happen is in this room, and quite frankly, outside of this room as well. And so I just want to say thank you for coming before us, because while we're thankful for the many innovations you shared with us, I think we all know it's just not enough for the people who not only depend on it, but deserve to be able to have a high-end product. And I do want to remind people that when I've used transit, I've always used it as a choice rider. But many of the people we represent, it is not a choice, and their inability to have access to a reliable system inherently makes them less reliable. So when they finally make it to work and do a good job, and they're 15 or 30 or 40 minutes late, now their reliability is impacting the economic sector. So we're all connected. So thank you for your leadership and time, and I'll yield to, I guess, our council leadership.
Yes. Are there any other members of the delegation that want to provide remarks? Okay, so we will now pivot over to the Baltimore City Council. Yes, Vice President Middleton.
Good morning. Good morning. So I guess I'll start off, and I'll start off by just kind of repeating something that the mayor had mentioned in his opening statement. And people know every time you mention the word Park Heights, it just brings something in me. And also because I've been wrapping up my 18th year representing, being a representative in this city, and particularly Park Heights. We have to say over and over again, and I keep reminding people, that Baltimore City is the economic engine for our entire state. And when you look at things and make decisions of things, Baltimore City should be at the top of that list, because failures that happen in Baltimore City, it would be worse around the surrounding counties. I agree with everything that my state colleagues delegation has mentioned, and it's just so important. I just want to give one quick example of the things that are going on in Park Heights. We know that Pimlico is getting ready to go through a massive renovation. I represent that southern side of Park Heights, and transportation is so important. We know that Reisterstown Road and Park Heights Avenue are gateways. We just designated Park Heights Avenue as a main street, the largest main street in the entire state. These are important key things that make that connection. Right there in the Wabash area, where one of the light rail stations, is located, it's our first transit-oriented over 300 apartment complex. It's almost, people are calling, it's really filled up. So we want to continue to bring people to our city, and you gotta keep us at the top. Make it a priority, as was mentioned. You got to keep us at the top of the forefront with everything that you do. I realize how important that is from being the past president representing the city on the Maryland Association of Counties and traveling around the state. Nothing can happen unless you include and make Baltimore City a priority. And then on that note, I'll let Councilman Z. Cohen.
Thank you, Secretary. Good morning to the mayor's team. Thank you for being here in Baltimore. And to reiterate a comment that Delegate Smith made, I think you're seeing a united Baltimore City show up today. Both our delegation, our city council, we are all here to stand up for public transportation for our city. I do want to thank you as was mentioned in the past, I think your team does an excellent job with really limited resources, and you all work really, really hard. However, we cannot stay silent on this year's draft capital budget. Let me be clear, this budget is an existential threat for the continued operation of Baltimore City's already struggling transit system. If adopted, I fear it will undermine MDOT, MTA's long overdue efforts now underway to expand our transit system with the Red Line and North-South corridor. I also want to emphasize that this capital budget does not equally cut across the state. This budget reflects a troubling trend of balancing the budget on the backs of working families and young people in Baltimore City. And to reiterate what colleagues from the legislature said, we do not want to pit ourselves against WMATA. This is not a Baltimore versus DC thing, but the reality is that WMATA's capital improvement program is receiving an increased allocation of $26.7 million compared to FY24 to 29, not including FY30 investments. In addition to increased funding for WMATA, more than $1.2 billion, about 25% of the MTA's programmed capital funding in the FY25 to 30 CTP will go to the purple line in Montgomery and Prince George's counties, which has seen years of cost increases and overruns. Meanwhile, MTA investments with a direct connection to Baltimore City are slated for cuts of at least $585 million. So my question to you, Mr. Secretary, is why is a transit rider in the Washington region worth more investment than a transit rider in West Baltimore?
They're not. They're all the same. I mean, basically, we have to serve all the citizens in the state of Maryland equally, and we try to do that the best we can. We have focused quite a bit on the operation side at MTA. As you may recall, we had serious issues there. We have reinvested in that, I mean, particularly in terms of getting bus operators, getting the pins to do that, for instance. So we're trying to balance as best we can, and that's what we continue to try to do.
No, and look, I do appreciate that, appreciate everything that was mentioned, of course, about your commitment to the Key Bridge, to all the partnerships with Baltimore City, but our dollars reflect, our budget reflects our values, and right now this budget is balanced on the backs of working people and young families in Baltimore, and we must do better, and I look forward to working with all my colleagues in the City Council, our legislators in Annapolis, and certainly Mayor Scott and his able team to make sure that when we come back after this legislative session, that all the commitments that have been made are fulfilled and that we live out the values that we've been preaching from up high. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Councilman.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Good morning.
I'm Ryan Dorsey, City Councilman from the 3rd District, and having Administrator Arnold here to me gives new meaning to fighting for my constituents. We need a whole lot more money for the institution that she runs, the organization that she runs, the administration. I want to start by echoing Delegate Smith's sentiments about what may have been the case in the past and where we are today in terms of city leadership. When I joined the council 8 years ago, the prevailing sentiment of response, if you were to complain to city leadership about transportation, would be, well, the state runs that. You'll need to talk to them. To be blunt, the city was overlooking its part in designing streets that help transit operate more efficiently, create alternatives to driving by making biking a more safely viable means of getting around, and planning to build neighborhoods that are more walkable. Those days are behind us. Baltimore has led the Complete Streets movement for the state. We are building bus lanes and bus bulbs and floating bus stops throughout the city, including the $96,000 that was just granted to make temporary bus bulbs permanent along Harford Road. Thank you. And if you look at our planning department's newly proposed 10-year master plan for the city, you will see that it identifies the Red Line, the North-South corridor, and other places of critical transit investment as places for growth to build more transit and pedestrian-oriented community building. I think this is critically important because there will never be another Bethlehem Steel or General Motors plant in Baltimore City. And it would be unwise for us to count on Hail Mary projects like Amazon headquarters 2 or whatever to save Baltimore's economy. It will happen in our neighborhoods that we regrow our economy, that we rebuild our job opportunity and livability in Baltimore City. And for that to happen, the state's investment is necessary to make those neighborhoods livable. Transit accessibility and high transit ridership neighborhoods are not only more capable of delivering job opportunity and tax-based growth, but they're more affordable for those who live there and more affordable in that they cost less than half as much per household for the city to provide and the state to provide basic services like stormwater and police and fire response and roadway maintenance. This plan, this proposed budget undermines our ability to rebuild those neighborhoods that need regrowth, to further build the neighborhoods that depend on investment like the North-South Corridor and the Red Line to grow in its prosperity, and is undermining the city's ability to, in the future, be able to use our limited resources more efficiently per household to deliver a high quality of life to people in Baltimore City. Transit investment is absolutely critical to this. And so I've mentioned, as many others here have, the Red Line. This plan, if I'm not mistaken, plans no construction funding for the next 6 years. That means despite Governor Moore really stumping about the importance of restarting this project, proposing that it begin as early as FY 26 and 27, that there is no chance with this plan that the Red Line construction begins any sooner than 2031. In the best case scenario, that's the last year of Governor Moore's administration. That's an unacceptably late timeline for any level of visible progress on that project. And at the same time, this plan pulls all funding for continued planning of the North-South Corridor project. Again, I mentioned this. These are two things that are critical to Baltimore City's comprehensive master plan that this city council is about to vote on in the next week or so. We are counting on this as the backbone of economic development for the city. As you've already heard so many ask, how is it possible that we are exceeding the funding mandated? And I don't think I've heard a pointed response to this question. How is it possible that we have even proposed a plan that exceeds our mandate to WMATA while falling short of our legislatively mandated minimum for state of good repair in the Transit Safety and Investment Act? I heard a lot here about safety as the #1 priority, but we are falling short of the Transit Safety and Investment Act minimums. How is it possible that we even got to this place?
And just to be clear, on the case of WMATA, in this 1 year, yes, it does meet their capital needs, but again, they have the same basic state of good repair, unmet needs in there when you look out to the full program period. They're wrestling with that issue as well. I understand that, yes, in this year, that they got the bump up, but the overall level of state of good repair investments are not being met there as well. And it's not it's not us against them. It's just factual. We have the same issue down there that we're facing here in terms of overall state of good repair needs.
I know it's not about us versus them, but I hope you understand that it certainly feels like that from this side of the table. Because not only are we exceeding the mandate to fund WMATA and underfunding the mandate for MTA. But that's coming on the back of Baltimore City specifically. That the only substantial project that has moved forward in recent years within MTA is the Purple Line. And while we are continuing to advance WMATA's interest and the DC suburbs' interest, we are delaying any meaningful progress on not one, but two projects here in Baltimore City, the Red Line and the North-South Corridor project. How is it that we are delaying not one, but two here in Baltimore City while exceeding those goals in WMATA and further advancing the Purple Line?
Again, it's the limited dollars that we have, that we can't do the north-south. Yeah, that's why we had to pull that back. We're continuing to do the prep work for the Red Line, but you're right, it's not shown for construction. It's not have those dollars in it yet.
That's my only questions.
You have other members of the City Council? Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you so much for being here, and thanks to my colleagues for being here as well. I just wanted to obviously echo what our electeds have said. It's extremely important that we be treated just like everybody else. I represent part of where the bus line that has the highest ridership in the state is in my district. It's in the 4th district. It's part of the 13th district. It's part of the 12th district. It's part of the 2nd district, which was also going to be part of the North-South Corridor project. It is the highest ridership in the state, which means there are more people using that route than ever, and there is more need because we know that there are more people standing on those bus stops waiting to get on those buses. And so the North-South Corridor project is extremely important to my constituents and to the city. And so pulling back the design funding basically says to us that those people who ride those buses, my constituents, don't matter. They want to get to work faster. They want to get home faster. They want to be able to have a reliable system. I represent 4 high schools, major high schools in the city, and I see young people getting off those buses at 9 o'clock in the morning, at 10 o'clock in the morning, not through the only fault of their own, but because the buses were late. So it's very clear that this budget is making a big statement that our young people, that our families don't matter. And I know the governor does not want to make that statement. So I'm asking that we make sure that those cuts are restored. The delegation has said they will work with you. We, as members of the council, will do what we can to work with you on this because it is that important. My second point is I want to have a separate meeting with you all about what the bridge collapse, the fact that 6 of our Latino workers perished. I'm concerned about the safety of our workers on the bridges. And there's some specific questions I have about that entire situation that I'll take offline, and I hope to be able to meet with you directly on that. So would the Latino leadership in the entire state. We are extremely concerned about the safety of those workers and workers not only on the bridge coming, but also on our roads. And we need to come up with a plan. We need to make sure that the companies that we are contracting with are making sure that those safety standards are there. So I'll contact your office directly on that. And I appreciate your time, again, for being here and your commitment. But again, this budget basically says that Baltimore doesn't matter. And I know the governor doesn't want to do that. Thanks.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, the administration. I don't have anything written down, but I want to come from my heart. All right. I feel like, the administration is taking Baltimore for granted. I know that the Miller administration stated many times on the campaign trail that it was going to leave no one behind. And what I see here is that we're leaving, and we're going to leave a lot of Baltimoreans behind. I think about my grandmother that no longer drives her vehicle to church, but she relies on public transportation to get from East Baltimore to West Baltimore. I think about those employers that are in my district that work at Hopkins Hospital, that ride right on the subway, right there in our district. They rely on public transportation to get to work. All lives matter, not just the surrounding counties of Baltimore City. We play a big part in making sure that the MTA, the state of Maryland, drive forward. I continuously say over and over again, as I piggyback on what my colleagues have said from the state and local government, that all lives matter. Take Baltimore serious. I go back to what Councilman Dorsey was just said, that we don't think that the Moore administration would want to see it any other way. I think you guys can do it. I know you guys can do it. The state elected officials are behind you. We in Baltimore City are behind you. No more excuses. Let's just work until we get it done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Mark Conway, represent the 4th District up in North Baltimore. So, of course, I'm going to bring up that north-south transit line. I'll say this to begin. I really appreciate the work you guys do. I know you're working with limited resources, and you have a great team that's working diligently to address the concerns that my colleagues, both at the state and, of course, the local level, has brought forward today. I was thinking I'm not going to reiterate a lot of the things that have been stated. I think you understand where we're coming from. But I appreciate also how the transit deficits that were presented with the plan today continue to contribute to a number of the ills that we see across the city. Before I joined the council, I ran a nonprofit doing workforce development and training folks for jobs in landscaping. I was able to get folks who are returning citizens to get trained and to do great work across the city. And I was able to get them jobs out in the county. You want to guess what the biggest problem was with keeping them in those jobs? Transit. I was thinking a lot about the north-south corridor. It's not just important because that's the most traveled bus line in the state, but it's also a part of the bigger connection for Baltimore City. We want more people using transit. We want people out of their cars. We want people walking around in our city, spending money. We want to invest in less parking spots and locations downtown. When we talk about the ability for the city to raise money, imagine if we could develop these parking lots along our waterfront in our downtown area, and have folks invest in Baltimore City and build housing or build whatever we need. So I look forward to working with you and the administration to think about how this all works together. When I grew up not in Baltimore, but in New York City. And in New York City, they have a very robust and well-connected transit system, which I know we would all love to have. Now, it's got a lot of maintenance issues. They have a lot of problems, but people can generally rely on it. And there is not this massive divide between who uses it because it's available to everyone. You've got millionaires on the train. You've got folks who are working minimum wage on the train. I would love to see that here in Baltimore. But we have to make sure that it is robust and it gets you across the entire city. And it can't just be the red line. It can't just be the purple line. We have to make sure that we've got other lines in motion as well. So I'm really curious. I'll pose a question because this is, of course, important to me as the councilman for the district. But what is the current status in light of this initial draft of the north-south corridor and what we might expect for that line?
So based on the draft CTP, I mean, we are finalizing the reports that we've done with the data so far and kind of putting on hold. If and when funding is available, we would love to get it going again. As you know, Councilwoman Ramos mentioned, it is the highest ridership route in the state. It rivals some rail lines, and so additional investment there would be very helpful.
Yeah, of course, I know you guys are dealing with budget restraints. I probably want to echo Delegate Lewis's comment. We are all looking forward to working with you to think about how we close that gap, because it is essential to the city and the progress and the future of this city. Not only to have that line, but even to think about additional transit lines across the city. But if we continue to delay and delay, it becomes 10 years and 20 years, and we know it takes at least a decade to build these things. So I want to do whatever we can to see through the red line and make sure that we have funding to see that happen, but also make sure that we lose no steam on that north-south corridor. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate your work and your team's work with the bridge. That's going to be incredibly important. It's also putting a lot of stress on our city, and I'm asking you to do both. Yes, sir. So, thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Secretary Wiedefeld. I'm Councilwoman Porter. I represent District 10 in South Baltimore. I represent the 13 communities in South Baltimore. I want to re-ground us in the conversation about the delayed North-South Corridor project. I just want to give you a landscape of the economic development down in South Baltimore. As you all are aware, the last 4 years we have $330 million within South Baltimore alone through the Hellenic Cables project, through the South Baltimore Peninsula project, the 895 corridor. So we do have that economic investment down in South Baltimore that deserves this type of transit funding. And when we look at the communities, the divestment that has come within those communities for generations, and where we are going in the future, it's imperative that we not only have the investment, but that we also look at it from not only just a either or approach, but a both and approach. Because right now, currently existing in South Baltimore, we have a reduction of bus lines, the lack of Charm City Circulator. I'm always talking to Director Johnson about increased funding for the Charm City Circulator. So we are literally, my communities are literally living in a transit desert where they can't even get to different parts of the district, from Curtis Bay to Cherry Hill into Main Baltimore. You know, that's a major problem when we talk about school kids that are going to not only Benjamin Franklin, which is the district high school, but also they're going and scoring into some of our top tier high schools, and they cannot get there. Our families can't even get to work. Even within South Baltimore, they cannot get to the economic engines that they need to sustain their family. So I'm asking, again, along with all of my colleagues, please reconsider this North-South Corridor study. Any type of initiative as it relates to some of the increased ridership that we're seeing from Councilman Conway and Councilwoman Ramos, but also my district as well. I'd like to also make a second point. I've reviewed the alternatives in the study, and most of them are connected to or have some connection to our hospital systems within the city of Baltimore. Given that Baltimore has such robust hospital systems, when we look at that connection from a public health perspective, people are not getting care. We know that our seniors are using our transit system to get to the hospital. We know that our young people are going to the doctors using that transit system. And so when we cut that lack of funding within this particular study, we are literally limiting public health and healthcare within our city. And so I implore you, as many of my colleagues have mentioned, this is very important to the city. Please work with us to see what we can do, but also how we can look at other alternative funding, such as the LOTS funding, to increase the Charm City Circulator, to look at alternatives in our city so that we do not have the current state of affairs that we are in now. Thank you.
All right, I think at this time, if just confirming everyone from the council members have made their remarks, we'll now transition in our agenda to certain key city partners. The first one to speak will be Brian O'Malley, President and CEO of the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance.
morning. Thank you. Brian O'Malley, Central Maryland Transportation Alliance. Mayor Scott spoke this morning about how cuts to MTA in this draft budget hit the most vulnerable people hardest. And a number of the speakers spoke very eloquently about the workers, the students, the families that are impacted when we see cuts like this, what are proposed here. Councilman Conway spoke from the standpoint of running a workforce development program, and I want to add to his example, Biotech Institute, another wonderful program here in Baltimore City that trains people for jobs in labs. The Mayor's Office of Employment Development at Mondawmin have both told us very similar things, that when they have graduates, the employers don't ask, who's your best student from your training program? They ask which ones have cars, because we can't deal with the ones who are relying on public transportation. And to underscore that with data, we look at a measure of what % of the region's jobs can the typical resident in a metropolitan region get to in under an hour by car or by transit. And in most metropolitan regions in the country, the figure by car is 100%. That's kind of the definition of a metropolitan region, is commuting patterns, where people can drive. In Baltimore, in 2015, when we started tracking this, the typical resident could only get to 11% of the region's jobs by public transportation. So your universe of opportunity shrinks by a factor of 10. You can get to 1/10 of the jobs. And so that's what the workforce development folks are telling us with these stories. And unfortunately, as we've tracked that number, it continues to get lower. It fell to 9% by 2020 and 8.5% by 2023. It's hard to make a number that small get yet even smaller, but we're finding ways to do it. And I fear that this budget continues that pattern. We also look around the country. You know, the last time the Baltimore transit system was expanded was 1997. And since that time, we don't let a year go by when we don't expand the road and highway network. We've seen expansion in WMATA, infill stations, the Silver Line. Our Maryland Transit Administration is building an expansion project, but not here. It's building it in the DC suburbs. We look at other cities, New York and LA, the big ones, Denver, Cleveland, Richmond. They've all been expanding in that time, but Baltimore has not. We've not seen an expansion. And while we are heartened by the governor's promise about the red line, this budget doesn't show the construction money yet. And the north-south corridor was part of implementing the regional transit plan, so we want to see those. And the 1990s was when the MTA light rail cars went into service, and they were supposed to get a midlife overhaul when they were 15 years old, and that didn't happen. It got delayed, and we're still not finished doing that midlife overhaul. And yet, in this budget, we're deferring the midlife overhaul for marked cars. I'm worried we're not learning from the mistakes of the past, and we're going to keep having suffering from the breakdowns and unreliable equipment by kicking the can down the road on these scheduled midlife overhauls and needed maintenance. So, when we invest more in our transit system, that promise that the governor made about, to be Maryland's decade, this has to be Baltimore's time. I'm sure a lot of people in this room perked up when he said that. That was heartening and encouraging, and something that people who care about Baltimore are hungry and desperate to hear. But unfortunately, the draft budget just falls short of that. And the elected officials in here, and Delegate Smith, I attend these as an advocate for many years, and I can testify as a witness that what you observed is true, that we keep hitting a new high water mark for turnout and people using their voices, so thank you. I believe that the elected officials in the room and the agency leaders in the room are the team that can make this happen and can make it Baltimore's time. And so we want to see you get this budget where it needs to be, and call on you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. So next up is Jennifer Vey, Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer from Greater Baltimore Committee.
Hi, good morning, and thanks so much for the opportunity to speak here today. Yes, I am here on behalf of the Greater Baltimore Committee, the leading voice for the private sector here in the Baltimore region. I'm also speaking on behalf of Baltimore's Transit Future Coalition, which is a joint effort of GBC and the Greater Washington Partnership that includes approximately 70 business, civic, and nonprofit organizations, including many of the largest employers in our state, around a campaign to support a strong regional transportation system here in Baltimore. A strong transit system is a major priority for regional employers and workers and is essential to the overall economic growth in the Baltimore region and the state of Maryland as a whole. Most obviously, a robust and reliable transportation system is critical to connecting the region's workforce to jobs and consumers to businesses. Our current system makes this extremely challenging, as so many people here today have noted, for those without access to a car, which constrains job choice and makes it difficult for employees to get to work, as well as have access to goods, services, and amenities in our city and region. And I can say, in fact, during many of the roundtables and workshops that the Greater Baltimore Committee hosted as we were developing our 10-year economic opportunity plan, I sat through all of them, and I can say with confidence that I don't think there was any single issue that businesses and employers mentioned more than our lagging transportation system here in the region. Beyond the needs, of course, of existing Baltimoreans, a robust transportation system is also vital to attracting talent and visitors and businesses and investment to our city and to our region. Regardless of whether one has access to a vehicle or not, a reliable and expansive transit system provides choice, convenience, and a higher quality of life, and thus makes regions that have such systems, as Brian actually just noted, more economically competitive than the peers who don't. And indeed, our best-in-class cities and regions around the country and even globally have best-in-class transportation systems. And Baltimore, unfortunately, on this front is just simply not one of them, and we're not keeping pace with our peers. These issues are long-standing and well-recognized, as we heard here today. But rather than investing to improve our current transportation system, and in turn, our region's overall competitive position, the CTP stands to move the region in the opposite direction. And we simply just can't afford to keep kicking the can further down the road. In the first place, we already have a system that's already on the verge of decline, and we desperately need to shore up our state of good repair funding. MTA services are currently unable to meet reliability goals, due largely to a lot of the maintenance challenges that have been discussed here today. The most acute example, I think, is with our light rail system. The challenges are well known to anybody who needs to use that system to get to work, to get to school, and to get to recreational activities, such as our major sporting events. Deferral of state of good repair funding will lead to further deteriorations in service and threatens the safety and operability of the entire system. Second, failing to maintain an adequate state of good repair jeopardizes federal funding. I think we've all heard that here today. For example, MTA's recently awarded federal grant for replacing its light rail fleet, as we've discussed, could be threatened if funds are not identified to renovate stations and replace the rails that are needed to actually accommodate the new cars. And we know our region absolutely will not be competitive for a generational federal grant for the Red Line if we cannot adequately maintain our current system. Finally, currently planned transit expansion efforts won't be viable if our state of good repair investments fall further and further behind. Our region's aspirations to grow MARC into a true regional rail service, improve bus service to regional job hubs, or make investments like the Red Line or the North-South Corridor will succeed or fail based on the health of our existing system. We can't build upon a weak foundation. We've heard many people invoke Governor Moore's own words about this being Baltimore's time, but then so too must it be time to invest in a transit system that supports new growth and new opportunities. The momentum is actually there. We see it at GBC. Right now, there's a tremendous amount of policy energy to support transit-oriented development, with high hopes for the reinvigoration of our downtown, new developments along the Red Line corridor, Station North, TOD opportunities in West Baltimore, Reisterstown, Odenton, among many others. And honestly, these aren't pipe dreams, but decisions about investment in all these areas are being made now and will hinge on the extent to which investors are confident that our current transit system will be maintained and be upgraded. We fully acknowledge the challenges facing MDOT and believe that the draft CTP demonstrates a good faith effort to protect Baltimore's public transit system, considering all the lingering impacts around the pandemic, inflation, cost overruns, unsustainable funding models. But deferments today will impact the region's competitive position well into the future. In short, our transit system here in Baltimore is absolutely vital to the region's current and future economic prosperity. It thus requires a level of investment that reflects its true value. As always, GBC and the Baltimore's Transit Future Coalition stands ready to partner with all stakeholders to this end. And I guess with that, just one question I have is, how can we better partner with you to identify the funding that's going to be needed to make the investments? Thank you.
If I could, I think that the legislature has the Train Commission. I think that I can't remember if you were a member of that, but obviously
One of
that's a
my colleagues was,
mechanism
yes.
that I think a lot of this will be debated at.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next and final speaker is Michael Huber, Director of Maryland Government Affairs from Johns Hopkins University in Medicine.
Thank you, Director Johnson, Madam CAO, Mr. Secretary, Madam Administrator. My name is Michael Huber. I'm here today on behalf of Johns Hopkins University in Medicine. Hopkins, as a large employer, a research institution, and a provider of health care, has long supported increased and sustainable investments in the region's transportation system. Our employees rely on it, as has been mentioned, to get to work. Our patients rely on it to get to appointments, and our students rely on it to get to school and around town. We cannot recruit and retain the high-quality level of faculty, clinicians, and employees without a functioning transit system in the city and in the region. And so we urge you to heed the call that you've heard today and at least meet what's needed for a state of good repair as prescribed by the 2022 Capital Needs Inventory. We also have leading public health researchers who have done rigorous analysis to make the connection between transit access and health equity, including health outcomes. You heard earlier about the way in which patients across the region rely on the system to get to appointments, to do follow-ups, and to seek the care that they need. And so it's one of many ways that you've heard of this morning that a robust transit system is essential for the city, the region, and the state, and we urge you to heed that call. Thank you very much.
All right, so that concludes all of our speakers, all of our remarks for today. I just want to say, heartfelt as director, just thank you very much for this time today. Thank you to MDOT Secretary Rudefeld and your team for being here, to hearing all of our concerns raised and answering all the questions. Thank you to all of our state delegation, our city council members, and our other key stakeholders who have taken the time to show up today, unified, recognizing how important transportation is for Baltimore City. There's not much that I can say beyond what everyone else has said, but I just did have a thought back to even in recent months of talking with some of the organizations the businesses down around the port area. And one of the notes they made is that they have some nice, high-paying, benefit-providing jobs with other additional opportunities. But one of the challenges, again, is people being able to have access to transportation to reach those jobs. So this truly is an overall livability matter for the city regarding the quality of life and access and employment security for families. So thank you very much. That concludes today's meeting.